Scott?
Make sure you
Is it
good?
rolling up in here?
It does.
And rising.
Gotcha. Bear with us just a moment, and we'll let her get the folks settled. That gentleman is the...
Where you find me, somewhere over the rainbow, bluebirds fly.
Good evening, everyone. My apologies for the late start, but I'd like to welcome you to the June 18th, 2015 City of Santa Barbara Harbor Commission meeting. With that, Ms. Przinski, would you call roll?
Yes. Bill Spicer.
Here.
Jim Sloan.
Here.
Corey Bantolin. Here. Betsy Kramer. Stephen McIntosh.
Here.
Dennis Power. And Helene Webb will be absent today.
Good. Mr. Reedman, any changes to tonight's agenda?
Mr. Chair, no changes tonight. Thank you.
Okay. At this point, we have public comment for anything that's not on the agenda. And I'll open that up. And if there's no takers, I'll close that. All right. Thank you. We move to approval of the minutes.
So moved.
Second. I'd like to make a comment. I think these are particularly good minutes. Jeanette, congratulate you.
Thank you.
As always, thank you. You got the first and the...
Power and Bantolin.
Good. Okay.
You good with that?
Sloan.
We move to the director's report. I'm sorry. Oh, I guess we should vote on that. Yeah. All in favor of the approval of the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any nays or abstentions? Thank you, Commissioner Kramer. Now we'll do the director's report. Mr. Reedman.
Thank you. Well, good evening, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. Since we last met, I attended the council meeting on Monday, June 1st, a special work session to review the upcoming budget. The first part was to hear the Finance Committee recommendations on the budget submittal. The second part was to hear the staff recommendations on any changes to the submitted budget. And then finally, for the council to provide final direction to staff regarding external funding requests. That's funding to agencies such as Visit Santa Barbara, Casa Esperanza, Chamber of Commerce, Downtown Organization, and so forth. But the bottom line is the council did not propose any changes to the Waterfront Department's proposed budget as the Harbor Commission recommended it. And the City Council is scheduled to adopt the Waterfront Department budget along with all city departments next Tuesday, the 23rd. Again, we don't expect any changes or surprises at that meeting with regard to Waterfront. So, moving on to the Santa Barbara Sailing Club, as reported last month, the Santa Barbara Sailing Club waiver request on the increased insurance requirement was denied by the risk manager. In the meantime, the Sailing Club agreed to the insurance, signed the lease, and their lease is scheduled for City Council on July 14th. So we got that all patched up. And tentative items for the July meeting are the election of chairperson and vice chairperson, and also commission committee assignments. That's a pretty light agenda, so we may not have a July meeting. If nothing else comes up in the meantime, we may give you notice and give you the month off. So with that, I'll conclude the director's update. Thank you.
Very good. Any questions for Mr. Reedman? Thank you, Scott. Appreciate it. And it's great news that the Sailing Club was able, maybe they didn't get their way, but was able to make it work. Moving to the Business Services Report, Mr. Bossy.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. Waterfront Department businesses, as you know, tend to be quite successful. We rarely have turnover within the Harbor District. However, members of the public, that does not stop them from frequently calling in and searching out new business opportunities and stating the businesses that they'd like to pursue in the harbor. And the frequency is such that over the years, we've started to establish an interested parties list. So when a space does become available, we have a list ready to go, at least to start with, as well as our outside advertising, and we can send out the information with the request for proposals to all these folks who have been interested in the past. So we thank them for them pursuing the activity, whatever business that may be, and then when the time does come, we put out the RFP and they receive it. So in this last instance, with the old Transpac Marine building, we had a list of 36 interested parties, and when the RFP was released for that space, they each got information about that, including the RFP and links to the RFP. So we thought it'd be a good idea to let you know that we don't just sit on the businesses that are here in the harbor. We're constantly getting information from outside folks wanting to do business, and so we thought we'd bring some of those ideas to you and tell you how we deal with them. So we have everything from hovercraft being proposed, hovercraft tours, massage parlors, barbers. There's even been a zip line proposed from Stearns Wharf over to the harbor and vice versa. Some of them obviously very creative and could be very neat, but will probably not happen in the harbor. One of the more recent ones was personal submersibles, and these would be rented and or sold within the harbor. And so these go underwater, and as you can see, they also can come pop out of water and go along the surface. And so we've had proposals from these folks. Another hot item recently, we've had 3, 4, 5 of these in the past 6 months, are jetpacks. And how this works is the actual jetpack that sits on the person's back is hooked up to a jet ski or a Sea-Doo, and that controls the power and boosts that person up in the air. I know Newport Beach has recently been dealing with this, and they actually did have allowed one operation for at least the next year, and they're going to see how it works. People aren't real happy about that, but that's the decision they made, and they'll see how it works. A few others we've had in the past include float planes. The float plane that actually showed up at our harbor last year, about 6-8 months ago, actually had wheels so it could take off from land, and it could also take off from sea or the water, and it could land there as well. So that showed up, and they've been kind of parading themselves back and forth. A lot of these businesses tend to come from the Florida area where they have a lot of this. Another frequent request, very regular, is SUP yoga. And as you know, we've been dealing with some SUP issues for quite some time, but this is another one, yoga. We've had SUP meditation, a whole host of different business programs that people propose to us. So just to remind everybody out there, these ideas don't go unheard. We do, again, put them on an interested parties list. But when we do have a space become available, one, it becomes available. Staff then determines the needs of the waterfront based on the Harbor Master Plan leasing priorities. And then we develop and release a request for proposals. And that includes all sorts of information about doing business with the city. It contains a sample lease. It contains our insurance requirements and everything so people can get a really good idea of what's expected of them if they want to pursue a business activity in the waterfront. We then, once these are received after the due date, we take all the RFPs and we meet with the Harbor Commission's RFP committee, who reviews those and interviews the various proposals and the people behind those proposals. From that RFP committee develops a recommendation for the Harbor Commission, and that selection is forwarded to the Harbor Commission for consideration. From there, we go back and develop a lease agreement, and actually today you're going to see the final stages of that with Marine Services. So we go back, we develop a lease agreement at the request of the Harbor Commission, come back to you. If the Harbor Commission approves that, then we move that on to City Council. So just to let you all know, we do get regular requests daily, weekly. It's quite a handful of requests, and we deal with them accordingly and put everybody on an interested parties list and see what comes up when the space does come up. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Bossy? I have one quick one. Since we were talking insurance last week and looking at some of these proposals, they they do appear to be almost extreme activities. Does the waterfront or the city need additional insurance if we brought in a concessionaire that was something maybe an extreme sport?
That's a great question, Mr. Chair. The city can adjust upwards in cases where things are, as you say, more extreme. That would be on a case where it would even be considered. So a lot of these aren't approved by the Coast Guard or are forbidden via our municipal code. So if somehow they did work and a quote-unquote extreme activity was proposed, then the city's risk manager could then formulate an appropriate insurance policy for that.
Thank you. Thank you for your report. Facilities management report, Mr. Triberg.
Good evening, Chair Spicer and Commissioners. This evening I have two projects to report on briefly. The first is the Dolphin Fountain. The Dolphin Fountain is located at the foot of Stearns Wharf. It is one of the most visited landmarks in the city of Santa Barbara, if not the most visited landmark. There's a sculpture of a bronze sculpture of three dolphins on the top of it that was created by local artist Bud Bottoms and unveiled to the public on July 15th, 1985. With the recent Stage 2 drought declaration by council back in May of 2014, we were required to turn off the water. No water is allowed in any of the city fountains since that time, so we haven't had water in just about a year. So it hasn't looked its best for quite some time now. We had a couple of signs in the moat informing the public of this water conservation measure. But not long after that, last year, the Parks Department landscaped a fountain in the Chase Palm Park expansion that's kind of down by the waterfront. And they did a really great job, and they turned the fountain into a landscape feature that everybody thought was a landscape feature, no longer a fountain. So some people saw that and thought this might not be a bad idea for the Dolphin Fountain. So we got together with the Chumash, Santa Barbara Beautiful, and the Men's Garden Club, and the original sculptor Bud Bottoms, and conceived a plan to restore the Dolphin Fountain, including the statue itself. The statue, after 30 years, had quite a bit of scale on it, and the patina, which is the colors, it's a color application to the bronze itself, had really worn down. So we hired a firm out of Oxnard called Masters in Metal that cleaned the Dolphin Fountain up, got all the scale off, got it down to kind of its original bronze color, and then they applied this patina. It's sort of an aquamarine bluish color, and it really looks much, much better, and they applied a clear coat to it, so it's really got a brilliant sheen to it now. The Men's Garden Club developed a planting palette, a landscape plan of sorts, and sourced a variety of drought-tolerant plants, 48 in all, that the Parks Department and waterfront staff installed just yesterday, as a matter of fact. They lined the moat itself with some visqueen, put some gravel bed in there, and placed all the plants in them with some bark all around. So it looks like, although they're potted plants, it looks like it's actually landscaped and planted itself. And you can kind of see the reflection of the sun off of the dolphin statue itself. So this has been what looks to be a great project. That something's really going to restore the aesthetics of this fountain while the drought continues. One thing to keep in mind is that we haven't done a lot of landscaping recently. We've got several areas that need more plants, but we haven't done it because of the drought. So if and when the drought ends, we're going to take these plants and we're going to put them all over the waterfront. We've got a lot of locations for them. It's important to note that the Chumash and Santa Barbara Beautiful were very generous. They each donated $5,000 towards this effort. The waterfront's picking up the balance of the cost. It's about $13,000 or $14,000 to do all this, but it's a really nice project. This July 15th marks the 30th year anniversary. The Chumash are planning a celebration at that time, a rededication of the Dolphin Fountain. It's at 10 a.m. on July 15th. There'll be dancers. They're going to plant some more plants out there, and it should be a nice celebration. There'll be a press release coming out, so encourage any of you to attend if you're interested. The other project this evening is one that's been before you a couple of years ago, as a matter of fact. The garden lot located at the corner of Cabrillo and Garden Street is pretty much our least used parking lot that we have down at the waterfront. Back in 2013, the local or the adjacent property owners expressed interest in opening up the fence in the northwest corner, allowing people to park there and access the funk zone. As most people know, there's very, very limited parking in the funk zone. We went through a permitting process that required Americans with Disability Act requirements and improvements We got it approved, and we went out there and we took sort of a simple approach and restriped the lot itself and put in a ramp through a landscape planner. And when we were finished, we had it inspected, and it didn't pass inspection. So what happened is it really created kind of a difficult process. We had to go back to a little bit of a design review process and through the building permit process and coordinate our efforts with the adjacent property owners up in the corner. What made it a little bit more difficult was that our property is in the jurisdiction of the Historic Landmarks Commission, and the Funk Zone properties are in the jurisdiction of the Architectural Board of Review. So coordinating all those efforts took a long time. But ultimately, it resulted in very significant and nice improvements. We essentially have a sidewalk of sorts that goes from Cabrillo Boulevard to the northwest corner of the lot. We've got a concrete ramp with a rail, all ADA compliant. Looks much better than it did before. We removed about 50 foot of fencing as opposed to just a little 5-foot opening. And there's 2 property owners there. This particular property received Architectural Board of Review approval, building permits, and they're 99% done with their improvements. And had you seen this property before, you'd realize what a significant improvement it's been. The adjacent property has their Architectural Board of Review approval. They're in the building review process right now, and I would expect they'll go to construction here in another couple of months, really significantly improving the aesthetics of that entire area. We expect the property owners to promote this area as viable access and parking for the Funk Zone, which will in turn probably generate more revenue for us and put this parking lot to good use. And that concludes my report this evening. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Great. Any questions for Mr. Treiberg? Commissioner Bantlin.
Carl, just want to say thank you. I was actually talking to former Commissioner Friedman recently, and so I'll have to pass this along. I know that was near and dear to his heart, so thank you for that.
Commissioner Power.
Thanks for the report. This is maybe a new item and might be under new business, but I'm prompted to bring it up here, both with the Dolphin Fountain and with the new Garden Street parking lot and access. Has there been any thought recently to wayfinding, a signage system that would bring people from this parking lot, Stearns Wharf, the Dolphin Fountain area, down to the main harbor with an indication of the diversity of businesses and nonprofit organizations that are in the harbor? Perhaps I've just overlooked it and there already is a signage system, but it would seem to me something that would be in keeping with a harbor setting. Could be along the entire waterfront and would direct people to the various locations. This would be kind of an extension, I think, of an issue that Commissioner Webb brought up at one of the recent meetings about the concern with people walking in the driveway and parking area between the back of the Maritime Museum and the front of the Santa Barbara Sailing Center, storage and so forth, where cars and people seem to always be mixing up as they're going in there. So I just throw that out as a thought, and I wonder if the staff has given any thought to that, and if at some time in the future, if they haven't, they might be interested in doing so. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Powers, we do have some wayfinding signage down there. For instance, we had about a $200,000 project back. It started in about 1995 or 96 and went through 2001. And it got scaled back considerably, and so most of it's more pedestrian wayfinding signage than you might see in your vehicle. But like, for instance, at the base of Calle Cesar Chavez, Garden Street, State Street, there's a sign at the base of each of those pointing toward the harbor. And those are definitely designed for vehicles to see. And then, for instance, at the intersection of Castillo and that's Shoreline and Cabrillo right there, there's a sign right in front of you as you're at that stoplight in front of Los Baños that says Stearns Wharf, Sea Center that way, Santa Barbara Maritime Museum that way. So we do have a lot of those signs in place already. They've faded out quite a bit, and Mr. Vossi's working on a program to get them refurbished and replaced. It's a pretty extensive program. We have quite a few signs out there.
Thank you for that. And actually, I was referring to pedestrian wayfinding. I am aware of the street signs, which I think are fine, but I guess I was just thinking of visitors strolling along and being aware at one end of the waterfront of all the good things that are at the other end of the waterfront and vice versa and so forth. So thanks for responding.
Sure.
Carl, my appreciation as well. I know that these projects, compared to your usual dredging and piles and dock replacement, may appear to be lightweight, but obviously the fountain is a very visible symbol, and I went and saw the statue itself recently, and I thought it looked great. And then obviously I also am a big proponent of the Garden Street lot. And a couple quick questions. It's open now, is that correct? And then my other question, that's not permit usable, is that correct, that lot?
Chair Spicer, it is open now, and it is permit usable.
Oh.
Waterfront parking permits are valid there.
I'm happy to hear that. Thank you very much for your report. Okay, Harbor Operations, Mr. Cronman.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair.
Oh, sorry.
Just had one more comment. And thank you, Commissioner Power, for your comments on signage. I actually had a couple questions as well, and was just thinking maybe we could agendize a conversation for a future meeting if that's possible. No timetable, but sometime in the future.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Bantelin, agendized strictly on wayfinding signage and that sort of thing?
Well, I think pedestrian signage in general. I have a couple more generalized comments, and maybe we can talk offline to nail that down. I just didn't want to kind of bog down this conversation with signage.
No, that's great. We can bring in, identify each of the locations where the signs are and that sort of thing.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Corey. Sorry for the delay. At this point, Mr. Cronman, please.
Good evening, Mr. Chair. I apologize. On May 23rd at 1 p.m., we had an interesting event unfold that lasted most of the afternoon. We got a call, Harbor Patrol did, from the wife of a prospective kidney transplant recipient who'd been on a waiting list for some time. The wife had been contacted by health officials who told her that a kidney was available from a cadaveric source, an individual who had passed away at Cottage Hospital and donated their organs. And the trouble was they couldn't get a hold of the individual. And they called us and they called the Coast Guard because it turns out this man had gone to sea for the weekend. In fact, he was at Santa Cruz Island. I'll mention now, he did one of the smartest things you can do. And as a boater, he filed a float plan. He told his wife where he was going. He told her he was at Fry's Harbor. So for the first time in anybody's memory, we took a Harbor Patrol boat to Santa Cruz Island because nobody else seemed to be able to contact the individual, and we had a good idea where he was. And we had crew on the boat who know the island intimately, had a veteran driver and a veteran and a relatively new officer who came from Island Packers and knows every nook and cranny and cove on the north side of the island. So they took off about 2:30, and it was a pretty nasty day in the channel, 20-knot winds and heavy seas. And so what would typically take an hour took about an hour and 15 minutes. And if you're familiar with Santa Cruz Island, they started west of the anchorage they were headed for in case the vessel had moved and relocated during the stay on the weekend. They also, mid-channel, contacted the National Park Service that brought a boat around to the east, north, and east side of the island and started up from Scorpion and started working their way west so that the two would ultimately converge on Fry's. And sure enough, shortly after 3:30 p.m., as you can see in this slide, Harbor Patrol arrived at Fry's, and there stood the target, if you will, looking rather astonished at a Harbor Patrol boat rolling into Fry's. And once he was identified as the individual we were looking for, he gathered some things quickly, and the three of them, and it's been in the news, so I feel free to say his name. His name is Scott Burns. You may remember he was El Presidente many years ago during Fiesta, a well-known figure around town. He packed his things and got on the patrol boat, and the three of them, Mr. Burns and officers Jan Martinez, and Anthony Lombardi, headed back to Santa Barbara, and by 6 o'clock that evening, he was emailing us from Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, and 8 o'clock the next morning, he got his kidney, and he's back in Santa Barbara recuperating. So we were all happy about that outcome. The next weekend was a different kind of event. It was Memorial Day weekend, and by early evening, around 6 o'clock, we'd seen a fairly normal day at the launch ramp with boats and trucks coming and going and trailers. But around 6:30, an individual backed his trailer and a ski boat down the launch ramp and kept going and going. And what happened was, because the ski boat had not been untethered from its trailer, he kept going, expecting, I believe, the boat to, float free. And two things happened. A, the boat didn't float free, and B, he just kept going and going until the whole kit and caboodle ended up in 8 feet of water submerged. And so the driver actually remained in the truck for quite a while. There was some concern. People were yelling at him, and we were encouraging him to get out of the truck. And ultimately, he kicked out a window. Apparently, he was searching for some belongings, trying to gather up a duffel bag full of personal items. But anyway, he got out. And then a Good Samaritan from the Santa Barbara Sailing Center offered to dive down and tie a line to the front chassis of his vehicle. And ultimately, we towed the whole deal out like a train with a Harbor Patrol vessel. So there are a couple lessons learned here. Always make sure your boat can float off the trailer when you're using the small boat launch ramp. And number two, don't just keep going if it doesn't, okay? Because ultimately you'll end up like this individual. Unfortunately, it could have gotten a lot worse if he had trouble getting out of there. It could have ended up tragically. So a lesson learned in the first report tonight regarding a float plan. A lesson learned here about how to use the small boat launch ramp. On the legislative front, I'm happy to report that the mayor has signed a letter supporting Assembly Bill 226, which involves food safety and fishermen's markets. And what that bill says precisely is that it would formally recognize fishermen's markets, sort of giving them the same legislative status as farmers' markets. But even more importantly, it would codify a whole range of guidelines and requirements for food safety so that the fishermen's markets are recognized, and here are the guidelines. As you may know, we have a fishermen's market on Saturday mornings. We also have where individual fishermen sell directly to the public, shellfish and finfish. And we also have one all day long, of course, at the Harbor Festival. And we've worked closely with the county's Department of Environmental Health to make sure we're all on the same page relative to food safety. But now the state has weighed in, is going to provide very precise guidelines on this, so there won't be any questions. So our local agencies and our local fishermen and what have you can all be on board, on the same page, with no questions asked. I checked last week, and the bill had cleared the Senate, cleared a Senate floor vote. An assembly floor vote, and was in the Senate, in committee in the Senate. I would anticipate, if I had to guess, it's going to pass easily out of the Senate, and the governor will sign it. I don't have a reason to believe otherwise, but I will surely report back to you if otherwise happens. But we believe it's good news, and the fishermen at the harbor seem to take it as good news, the ones I've spoken with. Speaking of fishermen, on not such a pleasant note, a Santa Barbara commercial fisherman has found it necessary to file a proposed class action lawsuit against Plains All-American Pipeline for the now very well-renowned Refugio oil spill. Stace Chevarez, who's been a commercial fisherman since 1989, filed the suit in Los Angeles federal court on June 1st. He's represented by the same law firm that represented fishermen, businesses, and landowners in the Valdez spill, the Exxon Valdez spill in 1989. And so that lawsuit has just been freshly filed. The defendant has several months to respond. I believe it's several months, but he has the Plains has some time to respond to this. And it claims that the Refugio spill, the lawsuit claims that the spill has damaged the livelihood of fishermen and businesses, and also the Santa Barbara County coast, and seeks economic damages. It also alleges that the long-term damages, and I'm quoting directly from the complaint here, Commissioners, so I don't get this wrong. Alleges that, quote, long-term damages include future lost profits due to the harm caused to the fisheries themselves. For example, the oil is likely to depress, even eradicate in some areas, populations of sea urchin, crab, lobster, and other crustaceans by directly killing numbers of those species or hindering their breeding and feeding. Similarly, Oil that sinks below the surface will poison fish and potentially smother their eggs, limiting their future numbers. That's what's in the claim. That's what's in the legal action that's been filed in federal court. We will keep you apprised of developments in this case. I think it's important for a lot of reasons, important not only for our fishermen, but an important decision relative to the impacts of the oil spill. The lawsuit requests a jury trial, and we'll see how all that pans out, but I assure you I will keep you updated as events unfold relative to that. And finally, on a celebratory note, 4th of July is just around the corner, and I'm happy to report that after a year's absence, a music simulcast will accompany the 4th of July fireworks this year, which will start at 9 o'clock sharp at the waterfront on the West Beach. And the simulcast will be brought to you care of KJEE Radio 92.9 FM. I want to repeat that for folks who didn't catch it, because that's where you want to be tuned in. It's KJEE, KG Radio 92.9 FM. And in addition, this year we're going to have live on-stage music from 3 o'clock until just before the fireworks show. And that'll be presented by a collaboration of city departments and local community groups that will entertain with family-friendly music. I want to underscore the fact that this isn't club music. This is going to be family-friendly music, and we encourage folks to come down because we're doing everything we can to develop and stimulate a family-friendly environment for the 4th of July celebration. We believe that's the way it should be this year and every year. But this year also we have a new fireworks, a pyrotechnic company going to be performing the fireworks display. Garden State Fireworks, this is a 130-year-old pyrotechnical company famous for shows like the 1988 Winter Olympics and New Year's Eve celebration in Times Square. So they're real experienced at this. We have all the confidence in the world in this company. And they'll provide this year's display, and they will also be providing the display for the Parade of Lights on December 6th. Always got to plug the Parade of Lights, December 6th, so people can write it in their calendars. As always, we'll have food vendors on Cabrillo Boulevard, just west of State Street, providing offerings ranging from hot dogs to barbecue to fresh fruit. And the department will expand this year's information about the Independence Day celebration on a website link, and I put it on this slide so folks could look at it and copy it down. This is the best way to access information about the event, plus parking information, bus schedules, and much, much more. It's santabarbaraca.gov/SB4th. And that would conclude my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Cronman. Commissioner Kramer.
Hi, thank you for your report, Mick. What changes do you expect as a result of AB 226? What changes in the fish market there?
I think the change I don't think you'll notice the changes per se, but the changes in terms of those of us who manage and help administer the fish markets both on Saturdays and at the Harbor Festival will be in our work collaboration, if you will, with the environmental health agencies and the fishermen, so that there are no outstanding questions relative to what the guidelines and expectations are. But the good news is, for fishermen, it elevates it to the level of a farmer's market, which in an industry that's always looking for value-added opportunities, that's very important.
Thank you.
Sure.
Commissioner Power.
Yes, I'd like to ask Mr. Cronman where the live on-stage music is going to take place for the Independence Day celebration.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Power, on West Beach.
Commissioner Bantolin.
Excuse me. Thank you, Mick. Question on the pipeline. So there's a claims process, and it sounds like this gentleman decided to go outside of the claims process. Do we have an idea of, number one, I guess, I mean, I know it's a class action. We don't know exactly how many are joining at this point, but how many folks have filed claims? Is there any idea of fishermen in the harbor?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Bantolin, I would only be speculating, and that's proprietary information. Even if I called Plains, I doubt very much they would release any of that information. But I'm personally familiar with, a handful, but there could be more. And what's interesting about this class action lawsuit, the members of that class have to be certified by the judge. So it's a process that's intended to sort of weed out, any vexatious litigants and what have you. This is intended to capture the class that is real and potentially impacted by the spill, sort of the legitimate interests. But that's as much as I know about the claims.
Okay, thank you for that. And then just want to say thank you to Harbor Patrol. I know that's probably close to home for you as well. I know Scott personally. I saw him a few weeks before that. I think it was great timing, so I just want to say thank you.
It is our pleasure. And just for the record, I didn't know it was Scott when I green-lighted this. I just knew there was somebody that, we needed to get to shore just to dispel any perceptions about my involvement.
Very good. Mr. Crum, and I had one question as well about the pipeline. Can you describe or tell me about that particular fishing ground and is it compressed or is it bounded by two MPA areas?
Commissioner Spicer, it is pretty much bounded by two MPA areas. To the north, you have the Point Conception MPA. To the south, you have the Isla Vista MPA. It comprises, as I mentioned, 138 square miles, and that includes everything potentially impact everything from nearshore fisheries like urchin, lobster, and nearshore urchin, lobster, crab, and nearshore fishes like grass rockfish, members of the rockfish family, all the way out to the shrimp trawling grounds, where you may have read in the paper, seen on the news, a shrimp trawler was actually boarded out there and asked to leave the area. He wasn't cited, but they said, you're fishing in the closed area. And I check that website every day to see if that area has changed, and it still remains static at 138 square miles at this point.
Excellent.
Sure.
Thank you. Appreciate the report as well. Okay, we move to new business, item number 6. Jeanette?
Item 6, appeal of slip permit termination for slip 2B13, Mr. Tim Corner. Recommendation that Harbor Commission consider Mr. Tim Corner's appeal of a slip permit termination for slip 2B13 in Santa Barbara Harbor and take action to either A, uphold slip permit termination, or B, uphold Mr. Corner's appeal.
Hold on just one moment, sir. Mr. Reedman, do you want to fill us in?
Mr. Bossie's going to give this report tonight.
Very good.
Thank you.
Please.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. The Waterfront Department rents slips on a month-to-month basis to boaters who own a boat, docked in a particular slip, and are registered with the department as a slip permittee. Now, the Waterfront Department has a very generous slip fee collection process, and consequently, slip terminations are few and far between. I've listed out the process as it ran in this particular event, and it's in your packet. Real briefly, slip fees are due on the 1st of the month, and they are considered late on the 15th of the month. So you have 15 days to get that in before it's considered late and a late fee is attached. We also send out a notice on the 15th of the month if that payment is not received, asking slip permittees to check their records and make sure that they have or have not sent it in. If they haven't sent it in, please do so. On the first day of the next month, we send out a 30-day intent to terminate notice. Following that, and in that particular notice, it sets the date of the following month, the first of that month, as the date that you need to have your payment in by. We then send out a reminder of that 30-day notice. In sum total, this is about 45 days into the process, reminding those folks that we had sent out the prior notice and to please come in and pay your slip fees. At any point in this process, up to the slip termination date, which is essentially 60 days after the payment was due, a slip permittee can come in and pay the amount due, and the process will end at that point. They will be everything will be clear and on the level. Now, if that doesn't work and we run past the 60-day process, the slip permittee is allowed to request a waiver of the termination from the waterfront director. If that waiver is granted, then again, the slip permittee is required to pay all the fees immediately, and then everything's dropped. If, in fact, that waiver is denied, then the last resort is here and an appeal to the Harbor Commission, and this is the last stop in this process. So again, these are few and far between. We do our best to work with the tenants, and we contact them, call them, email, anything we can to not get to this point. Mr. Corner has been a slip permittee at 2B13 since early 2001, and he's had somewhat of a chronic history of late slip payments dating back to April 2003. I should also note that Mr. Corner is a live-aboard, and he does have a live-aboard permit. And over the past year, a number of separate late slip fee notices and 45 and 60-day notices have been sent to Mr. Corner. Now, again, I've included a timeline regarding the process and how it worked in this particular instance. Again, it began with the payment not being received by the March 1st deadline. A slip termination for unpaid fees is an action the department only rarely undertakes. Most late slip fee issues are resolved by department staff and the slip permittee, and we both try to work together to make that happen. The last termination for unpaid slip fees took place in January 2014, and prior to that, it was November of 2007. So again, few and far between. And that concludes my presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. Jeanette read the two options that are currently available to you, and they are to uphold the slip permit termination or to uphold Mr. Corner's appeal. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Bossy before Mr. Corner? Commissioner Power.
Yes, I'd like to ask Mr. Bossy. We have a letter of June 6th from Mr. Corner indicating I'm ready to pay my fees. Has he paid his fees? Has he come in with fees at the last minute?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Power, at that point in the process, they're past the option of paying the fees. So they cannot, at that point, pay those fees, even if they came in with that money.
Thank you.
They're past that 60-day notice.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I had a question. Are there?
Go ahead.
Are there any penalties that come with late payment, or are we just asking? You're just asking for the straight fee?
That's a great question, Mr. Chair. Late fees are tacked on at $35 after the 15th of the month, and obviously as the months go by, those accumulate over time.
Okay. Commissioner.
How many other late notices has he received over the years? And if you don't know, just approximate.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner, we went back and looked through the file. What we did was tally the last year, and Mr. Corner has received, so the last 12 months, Mr. Corner has received 15 separate late slip fee notices, including numerous 45 and 60-day past due notices. We did not go back farther than that. It was a cumbersome file to go through, so we thought it appropriate just to stick with the last year.
So 15 notices over the last 12 months?
That's correct.
All told.
Commissioner Kramer.
And do you ever have a system whereby you can sort of prorate slip fees and to work with the slip owner so that he could pay a little bit one week and a little bit more next week? Or is it all or nothing?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Kramer, we have done that when this is within that 60-day process. Well, there's a point at which in that process we require all of those fees to be paid. You just roll into the next month and a partial payment gets done and a partial payment. And so you're never caught up to speed. So there is a point at which we require the entire amount to be paid.
There is a possibility within that 60-day period whereby they can pay partly and so forth? Or
more towards the earlier part of the process. But again, if we were to do that, sorry, Mr. Rubin, when we do that, then it turns into a slippery slope. We need to treat everybody equally and have the same responsibilities.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Kramer, you have to bring the slip to a zero balance within that 60 days. By the 60th day, it has to be brought back to a zero balance. Like Brian says. Otherwise, you end up just rolling into month after month after month and never quite catching up. So it has to be completely brought to a zero balance.
I can appreciate that, but with a liverboard, I wonder whether there might be a little bit of flexibility in getting to the zero balance in the process.
Okay. Any other?
Thank you.
Mr. Corner, would you like to approach and speak?
Thank the Harbor Commission for letting me speak here. The SLIP 2B13 has been in my family for 40 years, since 1974. I've owned it for 16 years. It's been my primary home for the last 10 years. And I'm a local guy. My parents are dead. Grew up in Santa Barbara. I have a wife who's part owner of the SLIP, who is disabled, is disabled now and was hospitalized last year. And now she lives in a recovery home called the Phoenix House. And the last year, it's been really hard on me, coming up with bills, work and stuff. You know, he's correct about my payment. But right now I'm working. I want to get, by tomorrow, my paycheck, I'm back on top. She's established, because she only has Medicare and a little Social Security check. And we've been married 27 years. She relies on me a lot. And a little unemployment. And I've lived there for 10 years. I know all the people in the harbor, grew up in the harbor. I work as a commercial fisherman. I was up early this morning. And bottom line is, yes, last year it was tough. I mean, I'm losing sleep over this right now. You know, it's my only home. Without this, I'll be pretty much in dire straits. So it's up to your decision what you decide. Give me one more chance. I took this all the way up this because all these guys have worked me a lot, and they have. But I've been having a hard time, and I'm getting back on, and it is my home, my only home, pretty much. I have no family in town except my wife. If I lose that, it'll be tough on me. And I'm working. I want to keep up, make a promise, pay my bills on time. Because for 16 years, I did pay my bills on time. A lot, maybe one default. When my mom died, I actually paid some years 1 year in advance. I went back. So I got a small inheritance, and I paid all the bills all at once. But that didn't last through mismanagement of my trust. And so I'm pretty much all on my own now, working. And that's pretty much in a nutshell.
Right.
But go ahead. It's just been a hard year. Never had one this hard.
Sir, I respect that, and the gravity of a decision, particularly as a liverboard, is not lost on this group. I guess one of the questions I have with the habitual history you show, how would I be convinced, or are you telling me that you won't be a late pay consistently moving forward?
I guess one more chance. Look and see. Like tomorrow with my paycheck, I can pay up. And then if maybe just a short probation, if I miss one, kick me out, or I'm just back on my feet. Yeah, first time in my life I've been kicked down. A lot of people in America have gone through hard times. And it's my first time.
All right. If you don't have anything else to say, I think we need to. Question or comment?
Go ahead.
Yes, I'd like to ask Mr. Corner, are you saying that you could, within the next day or two, bring your balance down to zero?
Yes.
And you also indicated that you won't be late again?
Of course.
Would you be willing to consider a voluntary move and no further appeals if you were late again?
Yes.
Thank you.
Commissioner Bantlin.
Thanks. I guess the question's for Mr. Bossy. So you said you only went back a year, but it says chronic history of late slip payments dating back to April 2003. So that's kind of my issue is it just a past year thing, or can you speak more to the previous 10 years or so?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Bantlin, the best reference I could give you is, to be honest, we didn't go back past a year. We didn't think that would be a favorable approach. I can tell you that the file is not one file, it's two files, and one of the thickest files we have within all of our slip permittees. It's a good 6 inches thick. So I really didn't want to defame anybody, and so we drew the line at 1 year. And I understand the rationale of this 1 year, but this goes back to 2003 when the first one was put in. I would hesitate to hazard a guess as to how many.
No, and I appreciate that. I think that's kind of my issue, Mr.
Can I
Corner,
speak?
is
In 2000, my father died. We grew up in Montecito, and there was a trust left. My mom ran it with Santa Barbara Bank and Trust, and my bills were being paid for me. That was kind of a small bill, right, $300 a month. And Santa Barbara Bank and Trust, and my mom took care of that for me. And if some were late, it wasn't on my behalf. But just late, my mom passed away, and now I don't got to take care of myself. As I mentioned before, I did pay some of my slip fees a whole year in advance when I came into a little bit of money to make sure I was comfortable.
Chair,
Yes, certainly.
if I may,
Commissioner McIntosh.
on our letter to Mr. Corner on May 27th, we said the balance at that point in accumulated fees, visitor fees and delinquent slip fees was $1,245. That was on May 28th. Do we know what the balance is now?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner McIntosh, yes, we do. The slip fee balance, meaning if he were to come in and pay his slip fees, is a little over $1,600. I believe it's $1,638, and I want to say 30 cents. Now, with all the other fees that he's there's kind of two fee structures here. There's the slip fees themselves, which he has failed to pay over the last couple months. Once you get past that 60 days, you're on a visitor slip fee rate. And so that every day, and it starts to increase and increase and increase. So if you were to go that route, it would be about a little over $3,200. But if he were to come in to get cleared up and zero balance, it would be that $1,600 and change figure.
Can I speak? I was aware of that, but I kind of threw the dice. Didn't want to move my boat out into the anchorage. I'm an old guy, so I stuck it there hoping for the best.
So the boat is still there?
Yes.
And I can understand we don't really want to set a precedent and give special consideration or change the rules with every situation. It's not an easy decision for the commission to make, as you know.
Of course.
Commissioner Power.
Yes, I have another question, Mr. Corner,
Yes.
for you. When you saw this slip termination getting to be at the final stage and
Yes.
coming to this, if I could use the word last-ditch effort, what alternate plans did you start to make?
I
And
was
could you share
scrambling, calling
anything?
friends to help me out.
Sorry?
I was scrambling. I called a family member out of state to help me out with some money because it was coming to that 11th hour losing my slip.
Yeah, well, I guess the question I'm asking, I'm sorry if I wasn't clear. Let's say you were ordered, the slip was terminated, lease was terminated, and you were told to get your boat out.
Right.
What would your plan be?
I talked to some friends, and I thought I had a good chance of keeping my slip, so I kept it in the slip instead of moving it out because I believed that I might win this and be able to keep my slip. I said like throwing the dice. You know, I can pay my fees that are due, but if I have to pay the $75 a day they're charging now, it would be a tough one on me.
Thank you.
I just went for it.
And to follow up on that, so you could pay the $1,600 tomorrow,
Yes.
okay, but not $3,200.
No.
Okay.
I just have a follow-up to something you said, Mr. Corner. So you said that for a period from '03 to the last year or so,
Yes.
Santa Barbara Bank and Trust is the one that was responsible for the late
Well, and my
payments?
mom, who was a trustee.
But you said that someone was paying the bills for you.
Yes, but coming through my mom, but the money came to her, and she was paying my bills through a trust. I grew up in Montecito. My dad left the trust for the kids,
Right.
mainly for my mom, and she'd paid the little bills for us. And I was doing some travels overseas a couple of months in Fiji Islands and stuff, and she might have missed a few payments. But it's true, the last year, I've been late a lot on the edge.
Well, but it
Admit
sounds like you've been late for the last 13 or 14 years.
No, not 3 or 14 years. The last 14 years, there might have been like 2 late where I was up to the 2-month edge. But the last year, it's been back to back.
Yeah,
But over 16 years,
that's not what I'm hearing from staff, so.
well, he said...
I'm trying to
he didn't have-
reconcile this in my own mind.
Well, of course.
If you have a file, 2 files that thick.
Yeah.
I think they're giving you the benefit of the doubt by not bringing those files
Yeah.
with them. And so I just, again, we're trying to get an assurance that if we do allow you to pay it tomorrow,
Right?
that it will not happen again.
Yes.
And I guess the track record, from what I'm hearing, is not there that it won't happen again.
Well, the track record is kind of vague because they only went back 1 year, and the file this thick could be other things. Because my record, like I said, in 2001, I paid the whole year in advance, $3,000, and then next year, got some money in the bank, paid it in advance.
Okay,
The
but
money ran out.
I guess since 2003, so that's
Yeah.
12 years, there's
Right.
been a number of delinquencies.
Yes.
Is that fair to say?
Yeah, but always caught up and paid. I never had the termination notice, but I've had a few where you're past the 15th, and you got to pay by the next month. Otherwise, it's going to go to the termination process. It have been a few of those, but the termination process, almost none of those. But in the last year, yes, a few of those.
Sir, what I'm wrestling with is I do not want to put you in harm's way. I do not want to create another homeless person. I don't want to, put you, but I also don't want to put the staff in the position of being right here again in 31 days.
Right.
So that's what we're facing right now.
Of course.
And you're employed now, and you believe you can stay current.
Yes, and as Dennis mentioned, there's power that I'm willing to waive if I fail again. I can't appeal it. You brought that up? Yes.
Okay.
Like a do or die situation.
Commissioner Bantle?
Sorry for the chatter up here. I was just curious. I heard 3,200 mentioned, and I must have missed that because I get the 16. That's basically if the boat was gone today, you'd owe 1,600, if I'm understanding correctly. Still, is that correct in past? But then where's the 32 come in? Sorry if I'm confusing.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Bantelin, what happens is when the slip is terminated, the vessel, we apply the security deposit to the outstanding amount, and we terminate the slip. As of that day, it goes on visitor status. And as you know, that's 90 cents a foot a night for the first 14 nights. After that, it goes to $1.80 a foot a night for the next 14 nights. After the 28-day period, it goes to $75 a night. So you very quickly roll up a large fee for storing this vessel in the harbor, and it never left. And so that's what that is. That's the fees that have rolled up, visitor fees, because the slip status has been terminated, and he's stayed in the harbor as a visitor, and then even beyond the visitor period of 28 days, accruing that $75 a day fee. And that's how it exponentially increases to the $3,200 fee. What we're saying here is pretty generous, really. If we were to reinstate this, it would be sort of like wiping the slate clean and saying, okay, all you owe us is the slip fee, the liveaboard fee, and the late fee back to March 1st or whatever it is, and forget that all this ever happened. That would be the $1,600 figure.
Okay, all right. That's what I was getting at. So if it was terminated, he'd still owe $3,200 today?
Yes, if this is
Okay.
if the
That was-
appeal is
that was my
denied,
question.
the $3,200 is owed, and that will, need to be collected on.
Okay, thanks.
And I'd also I'd like to clarify something that's been going back and forth and round. This is not a one-year problem, as Commissioner Sloan has been pointing out. This is a chronic problem that goes back many years. Many late fee notices I've signed when I was business manager. I don't see them now that I'm the director, so I haven't seen them since 2011. But between 2003 and 2011, I personally signed many on this account, just to dispel any confusion there.
And then the $785 is the monthly, correct?
That's on the letter.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm looking at, but that's the monthly. Well, that's my next question. What is the monthly? Because I know there's different numbers with the deposit and everything. So, what is the standard monthly owed?
It's $370.
$370. Is that correct?
I'm not sure what his monthly slip fee is.
Yeah, I believe it's $330 plus 140 live aboard, if I'm not mistaken. It's somewhere right in there. Let me.
170 with 200 liverboard times two, I think 370. 370 something. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, we're in the ballpark.
Sorry, yeah, I don't need an exact. I kind of wanted to see what this started at, getting to 3,200. I'm fine with moving. That we uphold the slip termination, and I think it's to what Commissioner Sloan said. I think it's just the history. If it were 1 year, I think might be willing to reconsider. And these gentlemen don't usually bring us cases that are not. That are short-lived, and so that's my reasoning for making the motion.
Commissioner Kramer.
And I appreciate what the staff does, but I think everything should have an exception, and I like the idea of giving one more chance to try. I know you're a longtime Santa Barbara resident. Your family were not friends of mine, but we're friends of friends, and I know you have a lot of deep roots in this community. And I think I would vote to uphold the appeal with under conditions that Commissioner Power mentioned, that you would waive any further appeal if you can't make it.
I'd be fine with that.
But that's where I'm coming from.
Okay. Commissioner Sloan.
I think we have two issues here, really. One is the slip termination, and then is the amount owed if there was going to be some sort of
Correct.
waiver that went there. The problem that I have with just going back to the 1638 is that we have rules, and if the slip's terminated, it goes to the visitor slip fee and things like that. So if we're talking about waiving that, then I'm afraid we're setting a dangerous precedent here that you can let these things go and go and go, and you just come here and ask for forgiveness, and we'll forgive
Half of it.
yeah, forgive half of it. So I think the number that we need to talk about, if we're going to talk about a possible waiver, is 3,200, not 1,600.
Commissioner Power. I'm sorry, were you done?
Yes.
Yeah. Commissioner Power.
Thanks for that clarification, because I was a little confused on the amount that Mr. Corner was going to be expected to come up with tomorrow. So one of the questions would be, obviously, is 3,200 something he could do, or was he thinking of the 1,600? And it almost seems to me that if we're coming up with a 3,200, we really are wiping the slate clean. Whereas with the 1,600, Mr. Corner would still be under the obligation that if this ever happened again, he just voluntarily move. So I guess we need to come to an agreement, I guess, if we're really talking about the 3,200 or the 1,600, and if it's a moot point for Mr. Corner, if it in fact is 3,200.
Can I speak?
Yes, please.
Well, my belief, if upon termination, it will be 3,200. I've been there 10 years, so I took a chance staying there because it's hard for me to move. And I was told, if I do get a waiver, then I'll just go back to my basic fees and just getting a gift, so to speak, from you guys. But I've been there 10 years, 16 years.
Who indicated that if you did get a waiver, you'd go back to the original 1,600?
I think, like when you get a waiver first time, you just go back to the basic fees without penalties.
I believe that's a discussion I had with Mr. Corner.
No one sent me a notice like, get your boat out now. I kept it there, kind of expecting someone to say, you better move it now. But I had no place to really go.
Yeah, the letter was pretty clear about getting the boat out.
Right.
I don't think there should be.
So I took a chance, I'm telling you the truth, because I realized, but I was under understanding if I got a waiver today, I would just have my normal slip fees due on a certain time. And if I lost, well, I can't afford that right now, so I know what I do, but I can afford the other fees.
Yeah, I guess I kind of sit a little in the middle here. If you could come up 3,200 and wipe the slate clean, then we could talk about going month to month and not having anything late. But that's beyond the means. Is what you've stated.
Well, yeah, my understanding, if I get the waiver, it's like I never really, you're dropping the penalty and I just pay my old fees with a monthly penalty of $40 per month on each month that I was late.
Before we go any further, we're batting around 3,200. What is the exact number?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Sloan, I was able to find the file and the details every day from May the 5th through yesterday. And that sum total is $3,218.20. Now, the other way we were looking at it was he has a liveaboard fee of $140 a month. His slip fee is $233.82 a month, plus a number of late fees. And you add that up for March, April, May, and we're already at June 18th, and that total comes to $1,638.15.
Could I ask what that date was again? May?
The date the visitor fees started accumulating was on May the 5th, and they started at $29.30 per day, and they are now up to $128.60 per day, and have been since the first.
So as of that May date, there was $1,638 for his slip fee and liveaboard fee combined. Is that correct?
No, that's not correct.
Forget the visitor fee and that sort of thing. But.
Sure. So coming into May 1st, he basically owed 2 months. He owed March and April.
Okay.
And so combined, and they were both late, that would be about $817.64. But then that May 1st, your May payment's due.
Right.
And so when we're talking May 5th, he's got the May payment as well.
And I realize the rules are after that date you go on the visitor fee basis
After 60 days.
But
After the 60
I guess what I'd like to ask then is, even though it's against your rules, if you charge the normal slip fee, we're now in mid-June, so if you charge the normal slip fee, what would really be due right now? That would be what, another
4 months of
20
slip fees?
24 or something like that?
I think it's 16 for 4 months.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Power, that is the $1,638.15. That's March, April, May, and June, including 4 late fees, as well as four live aboard months. Yeah, no, that's a lot of numbers being passed around. That's okay.
When was the last time a payment was made on this slip?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Sloan, if I'm reading this correct, Mr. Corner paid his fees on, looks like cash on March the 4th, $782. And that included 2 months of back fees for January and February. So he paid up for January and February in that March date.
May I speak?
Commissioner Bantlin, did you have a question?
Yeah, sorry, Mr. Bossy. So you said the 32-18-20 was yesterday? And then it's 128 a day, so today's 33.46 or whatever, and then tomorrow is 34.70 something. I just want to clarify that 3,200 was yesterday.
Sure, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Bantlin, the $3,218.20 would be as of 11:59 a.m. this morning. So once that 12 o'clock hits, he gets tacked on another $128.60.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Yeah, that fee, I understand, would be with termination, but you get a letter, and if you're late, not by 5 o'clock, you come in the next day, they won't take your money. And so they put you in a limbo. Even though you have the dough, they say, sorry, you can ask for a waiver, but they will not take any money from you until you go through the process. And I've been going through this process for 2 months, building up these bills.
Is that correct? He was willing to pay, but because he had passed the 60-day, you don't take the money and they move into the
To a waiver, which I was denied.
the visitor fee schedule?
Mr. Chair, at that 60-day, no, at that point in time, we are not allowed to accept payments. Now, I should also let you know that on May 1st, leading up to that, Mr. Corner was contacted on his boat by our Harbor Patrol who were looking for Mr. Corner to get him, to remind him that he needed to come up and pay. And so these weren't just letters that went out. And I hate to do this. I'm just trying to give you the facts. But phone calls were made, not returned, box full. Personal contact was made on a number of times. We do our best.
I understand.
Nobody wants to be here.
And there was still money owed, so if he came in with money the day after, he still owed the city money, and they would take the money that was owed in arrears. Is that correct?
After that 60-day point, at that deadline, we don't take the money. Your slip has been terminated.
Not even what his balance due.
Correct.
Okay.
You've been terminated. Then you start accumulating the slip fees. But if you'll notice, he didn't start doing that until the 5th, so there were another 4 days there where he wasn't charged accordingly.
May I speak?
Certainly.
I'm working as a commercial fisherman, so I'm out the islands a lot during uni. And yes, Monica came by, but I didn't have it. No, yes, they try and contact me, voicemail, but I work sea urchin, so I'm at the islands all the time. There's no phone contact over at 5 out at sea.
Any other discussion or questions? Okay. I think we're reaching a point where we need to come to a decision.
So I'll move to uphold Mr. Corner's appeal. On the basis of $1,638.37.
Okay. We have a motion. Is there a second?
We have two motions.
Oh,
He previously made a motion to
okay. I'm sorry. I didn't.
uphold the denial
Okay.
or the termination. Excuse me.
I didn't hear that either. I know Corey stated his opinion. So, okay.
No,
No,
neither have been seconded.
Commissioner Kramer has put forth a motion, but it has not been seconded. Certainly, I believe Commissioner Kramer's was a motion.
Mine was a motion.
Yes.
But Corey said that he made a motion.
Okay.
It's okay because neither have a second, and yours goes first, being the second one anyway, so it's okay.
All right.
If anybody wants a second either, I think they can.
Well, let's start with Commissioner Kramer's motion, which is option B.
Option B, and on the basis of $1,638.37, not the visitor fees.
And so we're looking for a second.
I'd like to ask a question before we
Certainly.
move forward. Mr. Corner saying he'll waive his right to appeal. Do we know that that is even legal for him to do that? Are we undoing municipal code by saying he won't appeal? I mean, it's in the municipal code that a liveaboard can.
I would be afraid that
slip.
if we do this and the clock starts over and 30-day notice, the whole process starts over again. I think we run into a legal issue, but I'm not an attorney.
May I comment on that as well?
Yes, certainly.
I agree that it's probably not legally enforceable. I think it's just when this comes back to us next time, it will be very clear that that we won't honor an appeal because we'll have this history. So I'm not sure. It might prevent a filing of an appeal, but I think if they did, I think we would be a little bit more aware. So that was my point. And also at this point, I would like to second Commissioner Kramer's motion, but I want to add that I have the greatest respect for staff, their application of the rules, and their own internal system for tolerance for these sorts of situations, and to be conscientious and humane. But I think in this particular case, I'm willing to take the risk, and I think it is a risk that we give Mr. Corner one more chance.
Mr. Reedman, one quick parliamentary question. As I know that there's a commissioner with a opposing view, do we get the other motion as well, or do we vote on this one and then talk about the other one?
Mr. Chair, you can take the other motion and have the discussion, but then I think you've got a motion and a second here.
Right.
And then you should take the votes on that one first.
Okay.
And then the other one. But I think if there's any further discussion on Commissioner Bantelin's motion, we should hear that discussion as well.
Okay.
And I don't believe it was seconded yet either, so.
No. And I guess that's my question. Should we need to vote on Commissioner Kramer's motion because it's been seconded? Yes. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Can I add some color to Commissioner
Please,
Kramer's
please.
motion? I think we should be a little more restrictive or firm with Mr. Corner's future payments. If we do grant you your appeal today and we allow you to stay in your boat and you only pay $1,638 for all of this and all of staff's time and effort on this, rather than waiting until we get to another 60-day termination period, I don't know how we do this, but to have an assurance from you that there will not be late payments going forward, just period, late payments.
Well, I think the way the system runs, if I am 60 days late, I can't get a waiver, like Dennis Powers mentioned. It's pretty much said and done. There won't be a second chance, the way the system works.
But what I don't want to see is staff having to chase down payments for 60 days going forward.
I want to get back on my feet and pay my payments.
Right.
The way it was. So,
Yeah, it's a very difficult
Yeah, I mean,
situation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'd like some clarification on the motion. So basically, the motion on the table is that if he pays it, he gets his slip back, and we're not putting any time frame on that payment or anything else? I mean, I think we need to clarify this.
I think Commissioner
My
Kramer, why don't you do
my
that?
understanding was that what's owed is $1,638.37 on slip fees. And is that correct? And that not counting the visitors' charges.
Right, but when does he have to pay that?
Well, I'm assuming he'll pay it tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yes, sorry.
My best.
Well, I think we need to clarify that in the motion. I think we need to put some real,
Sorry.
yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. And I don't know if I.
Okay, so Commissioner Kramer, will you state the motion that,
Well, that we uphold Mr. Corner's appeal and that the payment that is owing is $1,638.37, which will be paid tomorrow, the 19th, I think, is it?
correct,
By 5
5 p.m.?
o'clock or whatever you will accept it by, preferably sooner. And that we understand you'll be waiving any further appeal if you get back in this situation again.
That is correct.
Okay, we have a first and a second, and in lieu of any further discussion, I'd like to take a vote on that. Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, please raise their hand. Aye. Those abstained.
We're split.
Very good. I was concerned that might happen. Okay. Yes. So who is our Brown Act parliamentarian? So,
Mr. Chair, the motion fails at a tie.
okay. Thus, we are upholding the slip permit termination? Oh, we haven't voted on that.
We can hear another motion.
Gotcha.
And just a point of clarification, I think we have to do something tonight. I mean, it can't be 3-3 because otherwise
Yeah, you don't
bills
have
just
7
go
guys
up.
up
So
there.
I mean,
It's not
whatever
fair
it is.
to-
Yeah, I mean, so I just want to make that clear. We'll sit here all night if we have to, but I think we have to come up with something.
Okay.
Mr.
Just ask for clemency. Give me a chance.
Mr. Chair, for clarification, I just wanted to add one thing. Of course, I would have to check with the city attorney on this, but I'm not sure you can vote to allow the appellant here to waive his legal rights under the municipal code to an appeal if he should be late again.
I believe we understand
I'm just
that, and we
I'm just
discussed
advancing
that.
that, but I would have to check with the city attorney.
Well, that's why I phrased it as I did, that we understood that Mr. Corner would waive his appeal. I didn't say that he would waive his appeal, but that was the understanding of it.
And I
Plus,
think,
if I did appeal, it would be an automatic failure due to my
I think the
past.
commission's made it pretty clear where they stand on that. So, well, Is there another
I
motion?
guess
to-
one of my concerns is the precedent we're setting. You know, that always is something. You know, I understand Mr. Corner's situation and being a live aboard and a long-term resident and want to work with him, but I'm just worried that we're going to have someone else here with a similar situation, and we've set a precedent where we're waiving these visitors' fees. I mean, it's pretty spelled out pretty clear, both in the harbor rules and in the municipal code, how this deal works. And so now we're just undoing part of, you know, what's already in the code. And there is a clause in there that says that we do have the ability to offer a waiver, but, you know, maybe what makes it more palatable is not 1,600, maybe it's 3,200, I don't know.
Well, Commissioner Bantlin.
Well, I think Mr. Corner, did you say you couldn't meet the 3,200, and so that you, but
Not
you
immediately.
could with 16?
One question is, how often does this come up in front of you guys?
Slip terminations?
Yeah.
We've had 2 in a few months, and
Okay.
prior to that, it's been a number of years.
Okay.
And I think that's a testament to the amount of work that the
Right.
staff does to resolve these
course.
things. I'm sure there are a lot of these that come up, but.
Well, I guys give it up, but I kind of stood my ground and stayed there, realized that I might have to pay the 32. If I can pay the 16 and come up with a balance on a payment schedule or something, I'm willing to do that. I just don't want to lose my home.
Could you do it within 30 days?
I probably could. I'm about to borrow, but I could probably come up with it.
Do we have a way to handle something like that?
I'm sorry, can you please repeat?
1,600 tomorrow, and then the remaining 1,600 within 30 days.
Certainly, we have a way we can handle that.
And then from then on, it would have to be,
On time.
Correct.
so in addition to the 1,600, so in addition to the 3,200 in the next 30 days.
16 tomorrow, 16 the next 30 days, plus next month's fee.
Right, so it'd
course.
be the 3,218 plus another 473. 373, excuse me.
Correct. I would agree with that because it's worth keeping my boat home.
Worth to that. Or-
Yeah, I guess the motion that I would put forth is that we do allow a waiver on this with the agreement that Mr. Corner makes a payment of $1,638.15 by close of business tomorrow. The balance between the $1,638.15 and $3,218.20 is paid within the next 30 days, in addition to the normal
fees.
payments that are made.
That is correct.
And
I will second that. All in favor, please say aye. Aye.
All right.
aye.
Against? Abstain. Okay. Sir, I have very little tolerance for having this come up again. I'm happy that we haven't moved you from your home, but I won't put staff and I won't put the commission through another discussion like
Of course
this.
not, but thank you for the opportunity to
Very good.
come in front of you.
What was the vote?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I have 2 noes, being Commissioners Power and Bantlin, for the most recent motion. I have, with the most recent motion put forward, was Commissioner Sloan, seconded by Chair Spicer, and the vote was 4-2, and the 2 noes being,
I voted for it.
oh,
Sorry.
Okay.
okay.
You raised your hand.
You raised your hand. I'm
Perhaps my
sorry.
timing was off.
Okay.
Okay, so then I have 1.
Or I voted in favor of the motion.
I did also, yes.
So it's 5-1. Yeah.
Okay.
And if I may, I don't know how we enforce this, but for you to make your payments within 15 days,
Yes?
not 30 or 45 or 59, and make staff chase you and make the Harbor Patrol come by and visit you, and phone calls and unanswered
Yes.
phone calls.
Yes. Back on track. It's a wake-up call, for sure.
Very good. Thank you, sir.
Do I need to stay around to sign anything? Or?
You do not have to stay around. I do expect you to be at the Harbor Waterfront office before close of business tomorrow.
I want to thank you all.
Okay.
And thank you, I'd like to thank you for speaking to us, so thank you.
Madam.
I'm going to pause and get another soda. I'll be right back. Okay, moving on to, with a different tone, item number 7, proposed lease agreement. Ms. Przinski?
Item 7, proposed lease agreement with Marine Services. Recommendation that Harbor Commission review and recommend to the City Council approval of a 2-year lease agreement and 3 one-year options with Marine Services for 490 square feet of commercial space at 117G Harbor Way in the Santa Barbara Harbor at a rent of $1,200 per month.
Mr. Bossy?
Good evening, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. We were here last month with the results of the request for proposal process for the space formerly that housed Transpac Marine Services. And through that process, we presented the RFP committee's recommendation to work out a lease deal with Marine Services, who came out on top of that request for proposal process. Tonight, we are happy to bring you the proposed lease agreement for Marine Services. Again, as Ms. Przinski noted, the space is located at 117G Harbor Way. It's approximately 490 square feet. The lease terms, as indicated, are the initial term is a 2-year term with 3 one-year options. The lease space is the 490 square feet. The insurance requirements are the city's standard, and you are all experts in that after last month's meeting. And the rate for this particular lease is $1,200 a month with annual CPI adjustments. Again, we have representatives of Marine Services here if you have any questions. They plan on operating a retail store as well as housing. Part of the space will be for a showroom to show some of their products that they represent, Yanmar Motors and some other generators and things like that. They plan on improving the space, first of which would be on our side of the block, and we would be working on the facade. The windows are quite old if you've been out there, as well as the doors. So all the windows will be replaced. New doors will be installed, so it'll look similar to the adjacent properties, namely on the alley. So there, if you were to recommend this to City Council, we would then move on to City Council and schedule that. And in the interim, these improvements would be made by our staff. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Bossy? Commissioner Sloan?
When do you think that work will be completed?
Chair Spicer, Commissioner Sloan, probably sometime in August.
Okay. I'd move to accept the recommendation.
Commissioner Power?
Yeah, quick question. Is the term of the lease this sort of standard boilerplate, meaning the 2-year initial term with 3 one-year options, or is this customized for this particular client?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Power, we try to work with each of our clients. In this particular case, being that it's a new venture, a retail venture, which is, again, as we talked about last month, a nice progression of their existing business. We wanted to give them the opportunity to get that business up and running, but at the same time give us peace of mind that they're not going to be there for a month and leave. So this was a mutually agreed upon time frame. Get that 2 years up and running. Obviously, with our improvements taking into August, they're going to miss that summer season, so that also factored into the overall time frame. So again, worked out with Marine Services and agreeable to both parties, 2 years with 3 one-year options, and hopefully many, many more beyond that.
I just wanted to second that motion and looking forward to it. Thank you.
Okay, we have a first and a second. All in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any noes? Any abstentions? Unanimous. Congratulations. Thank you. Okay, item number 8. Ms. Przinski?
Item 8, assignment of lease agreement number 23408, Ocean Air Electronics. Recommendation that Harbor Commission recommend to City Council approval of the assignment of lease agreement number 23408 from Doug Chesmore, DBA Ocean Air Electronics, to John Payne for the 339 square foot commercial space located at 125 Harbor Way, Suite 7.
Mr. Bossy.
Good evening, Mr. Chair. With all the lease changes that we're talking about tonight, if you folks at home heard my presentation, you think I was a liar that things don't turn over very often in the harbor, but I swear it's the truth. This was just a fortuitous sequence of events. Mr. Doug Chesmore has owned and operated Ocean Air for 29 years. And he has been taking out 29 years of some of his equipment lately. In early June, Mr. Chesmore requested to assign that lease to Mr. John Payne. And if you recall, Mr. Payne was one of our finalists with the previous RFP discussion we had last month.
We do recall, yes.
Now, the space is located at 125 Harbor Way, Suite number 7, and it's approximately 339 square feet. You'll see it here in the hatched area, right next to the breezeway and the mail center. The lease assignment process, how this works, it's different, obviously, than our RFP process. But what happens is an assignment is proposed. Mr. Chesmore, in this particular case, came in early June, and following his discussions with Mr. Payne, proposed to have his lease assigned to Mr. Payne. As part of that, the new proposed owner submits a business plan, a $3,000 payment, which is part of our process, and he submits to a credit review. At that point, the staff goes through and reviews the proposal. We consider a wide variety of things, and as you can imagine, the business plan, the credit review, the standing of the existing tenant as well. If we're comfortable with it, it then moves on to the Harbor Commission for consideration. And at that point, if you folks were to recommend the assignment, we would then forward that to City Council for their consideration. And if it's approved by City Council, the new owner, which in this case would be Mr. Payne, would assume the current lease, and that includes the entire lease. He's under the same guidelines as Mr. Chesmore is. He's allowed to sell the same products Mr. Chesmore is, so he's in that lease. It is now his lease if that were to occur through this process. So with that, I'm happy to answer any of your questions you have with this process or this particular lease assignment proposal.
Thank you, sir. Any questions for Mr. Bossy?
Here, Spicer, I have
Yes.
just a couple. Please. What is the term of the existing lease that they're asking to assign?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner McIntosh, I believe Mr. Chesmore is currently on a month-to-month. He just finished his initial. He's been through a couple of these, so he finished his last chunk of the term and then had an option to renew for another 5 years, but decided to take a little bit slower and working on a month-to-month lease term at this time.
So Mr. Payne's lease will be a month-to-month?
Right now it would be, with the idea being that after 10, 12 months, after Mr. Payne gets in and finds his bearings and things, which I don't think will take that long by any stretch of the imagination, we would then look to, and I'm sure Mr. Payne would also look to extending that, renewing that lease in a longer-term process. So we come back with a new lease document.
Okay, well, maybe that answers my second question, because I saw a differential, pretty large differential in square footage or dollar per square footage on the marine services lease. It's $2.45 a square foot, and Ocean Air is going to be paying $3.20. Is that because of the month-to-month term? Is that why it's such a difference between those two? So it's a significantly higher rate for Ocean Air.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner McIntosh, a couple things there. When we did the initial RFP, we didn't get the kind of responses we were looking for. And so we did, with discussions with the RFP committee, reduce the rent we were looking for the 117G space that Marine Services went into. So that's what you see there. In dollars per square foot, it's considerably less for the Marine Services space, but the spaces are in terms of actual dollars, it's very similar. $1,200 a month at the one and $1,100 and something at the other. So in terms of dollars, it's very similar.
Okay.
And Mr. Chair, I might add, Commissioner McIntosh, back to what Mr. Reedman was referencing when we first went out with the RFP for the marine services space, that was proposed to be $1,600 per month. And as Mr. Reedman said, we did not get that, and so we reduced that to the $1,200. So that was part of the process as well.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Power.
I'd like to move assignment of the lease.
Before we do that, and I believe Mr. Payne would like to come on up. Yeah, welcome back, and thank you for your patience this evening.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, commissioners, and staff. As disappointed as I was last time, I couldn't be happier to be here so soon. And it just goes to show you, you kind of never really know what's going to happen next. You just keep happy and keep moving. And certainly after item 6, I will do a better job of that tonight. Mostly, I just wanted to say, on behalf of Mr. Chesmore, to put 30 years in our harbor doing work on boats is quite an accomplishment. And I can tell you, doing half of that for me, it's not an easy thing. And he has kind of been at the other end of the electronic spectrum for me. He's really excelled in our commercial fleet, whereas I've been really more in the recreational, or some people might say yachty, spectrum of things. So it's going to be a bit of a challenge for me to parse that gap. Luckily, Mr. Chesmore isn't going to be too far away, and he has agreed to kind of help me through the process and try to keep some of that legacy alive. And he's interested in seeing the Oceanair brand sort of carry forward. So anyway, I look forward to that, and thanks very much.
Please.
So last month you were here talking about a little bit different business concept.
Yes.
Will it be your intent eventually to migrate towards that business concept?
I don't believe that this space is big enough, and it doesn't have the same sort of aesthetic in terms of being able to split workshop and office environment.
Right.
So I just don't think that it's tenable in that location.
So this lease is going under your company, not the new venture that you formed with a partner, correct?
This, exactly, yes. It's a sole proprietorship just in my name, and we are going to, our goal is to keep Oceanair going as an electronics outfit, number one, but clearly I can't just completely stop what I was doing in our other fields. But electronics has been a major component of what I did in my Mobius rigging business, just kind of by default, really, not as any sort of aim in specific.
Okay. Thanks.
Any other questions?
I'll just second the motion.
Before we get to that, I believe Mr. Chesmore wants
Thanks.
to speak. And that's the last.
Hi, I'm Doug Chesmore. I own Oceanair. Thought if John was going to talk, I'm going to talk. I've owned it for 29 years. I'm very proud of it. Probably the last 2-3 years, I'm burnt out. I mean, I'm crabby. I'm tired of certain people. And I was just trying to think of what I was going to do, and this came along. And like I told John, I've always prided myself on doing the old type of business, not the way business is done now. And my idea of good business is when both people are happy. One isn't screwing the other. Both people are happy. That's perfect business, and that's what's occurring. I've done a couple jobs with him, and I was really impressed with how far he's advanced. He's pretty sharp on marine electronics. And like I said, I'll stay and help, but he's much more advanced than I thought. And we've kind of already done it, but almost all the dealerships I have, which are all the good ones, are going to be transferred under him. So it's basically the same thing. I think it'll progress a lot more now. Like I said, it's burnout. I'm proud of it. I kind of want to see it to keep going. The way I was doing it's going to go like that. I'm tired. So that's it.
Thank you. Well, it certainly sounds like a win on all sides. So we have a first and a second.
I just want to say thank you both, and congrats to Mr. Payne for continuing on until you found a spot. So thank you.
I would like to call for a vote. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any nays? Congratulations, gentlemen. Thank you. Okay, that brings us near the end. Commission staff communication, Mr. Reedman.
Nothing from staff tonight, Mr. Chair.
Okay, anything from the commission? Okay, I will take a motion to adjourn.
Motion.
First and a second, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anybody want to stay longer? No? Very good. Thank you.